Okay, great. I think we are ready to go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Founder Fundamentals, hosted by Y-Space and the Markham Small Business Center. My name is Diana, and I am the Marketing and Events Coordinator at Y-Space. We're so excited to be able to relaunch the series, and our last version of the series kicked off in the fall and was a really huge success with over 1,200 attendees who joined us from around the world, which was really, really amazing to see. We saw so much interaction in all of the sessions. And with this edition of the new series, we hope to keep the momentum going with new facilitators and fresh new topics. Now, as some of you may already know, we announced the extension of Y-Space to include the new Y-Space Digital, York University's virtual incubator for students, faculty, alumni, and community members. Through Y-Space Digital, we offer a number of programs such as Venture Catalyst, idea consultations, a virtual tech and a virtual food membership, as well as a tech accelerator and a food accelerator. Now, applications are open for the Y-Space Technology Accelerator, which is a free 4-month program supporting pre-revenue technology ventures. We also have applications closing tomorrow night for our Venture Catalyst program, a 6-week program for technology ventures to go from ideation to MVP. Applications are also open until March 5th for our Food Accelerator program for high growth food and beverage ventures. We'll be linking our website in the chat box if you'd like to learn more about any of these programs. There really are so many diverse programs to support entrepreneurs that are open to anyone worldwide. So I really do encourage you to take advantage of all of the resources available to you. Now, for today, we have a really great evening planned. And if it is your first time attending a Founder Fundamentals event, please do type your name in the chat box so we can all give you a nice warm welcome. Also, we'd like to know where you're all joining us from today. So if you can type your location so we can see where everyone is tuning in from tonight, that would be great. And I'll read off some of the locations. So hopefully we can see all of the areas that everyone is coming from. Lots of people from Toronto. I see New York, as well as someone from Portugal. And I see Markham, Palestine, Montreal, Panama, Scarborough, Toronto. Someone joining us from Singapore. Hello to you. Lots of new places. So great to see all of you join us. Someone from California as well. So great to have you all here today. Really excited to have you join us for this series. Now, the 11 workshops that we included for the series are really meant to provide hands-on learning led by industry experts and provide you with the resources that you can use to help build your startup. Now, those of you who attend at least 9 workshops out of the 11 will receive an Innovation York Certificate of Recognition after our last session has ended. Keep in mind that you must stay for at least an hour of each workshop in order for your attendance to be counted. Zoom is able to provide us with reports that track your login and sign out time, so there's no need for you to do anything on your end. All of the workshops in the series are recorded and posted on the Y-Space YouTube page, which will be linked in the chat as well. Now, this series could not be possible without the help of many people working behind the scenes, and I do want to take a moment to acknowledge David Kwok, who's our Associate Director of Entrepreneurship at Innovation York. David has worked really hard to source all of the facilitators and the topics that we have in this series. I also do want to let you know that we have Julia, who's actually working with us, and she formerly did her co-op placement with us, and she'll be in the chat to help answer any questions that you may have throughout the session. I would also like to take a moment to thank our partners at the Markham Small Business Center for providing their support with the series. I'd also like to welcome their manager, Don, on screen to say a few words. Hey, Don.
Thanks, Diana. Also, welcome to everybody. I'll be quick. You've probably, if you've attended other sessions in the past, have seen one of our Markham Small Business Center staff speak. Just to remind you that we are a government service offered by the City of Markham to assist entrepreneurs in the community with things like advisory, education, consultation on startup, regulations, business planning, marketing. And so we work closely with York University and Y-Space, especially with the new campus coming on board shortly. I think that's going to continue. I just want to remind everyone that if you're a student and in Ontario thinking of starting a business, there are some grant options available. Our summer company program offers up to $3,000 to start a business, and that's grant funding from the province of Ontario. If you don't live in Markham, feel free to still reach out. We can connect you with the office closest to your location. And I'm actually particularly interested in today's topic because we're launching more education and training programs with the Center for Social Innovation on social enterprise. And so if we see there's a strong demand for that in the community, then please drop us a line, say something in the chat, because that'll give us some evidence and support to continue delivering programming like today and even more in-depth sessions. So I appreciate your interest in today's topic and would love your feedback as we go through the discussion. So I'm really looking forward to it. Thanks, Diana.
Thanks so much, Don. So just before we get started, I do want to let you know about a few housekeeping things. As I stated before, if you can keep your mic muted, that would be appreciated, just so that we don't hear any background noise. If you do have a question, you can use the reactions button, raise hand, or unmute your mic to ask. You can also use the chat box for questions as well. So if you have any questions, you can use that chat box there to communicate with any of us. Now I would like to welcome our speaker, Lucretia Spagnolo, who is the founder and CEO of Vesta Social Innovation Technologies, a social enterprise at the intersection of gender-based violence, technology, and access to justice. Hey, Lucretia.
Hi there, Diana, and hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here tonight. My goodness, when Diana reached out to me and asked me if I would be willing to do this session, at first I thought, my goodness, what am I going to talk about for 2 hours? And then I realized that I can probably talk for days. So we're not going to do. And, but I do suggest that I was really struggling about how much information, right? So I do ask though, that if you've got any questions as I go along, like please jump in and ask questions, or like Diana said, use the chat bot, the chat space to do that, so that we can kind of make it as interactive as possible. And like I said, I tried to think of how to do this best. So I guess before I could start sharing my screen, I guess, do I have that possibility? Yes, I do. Here we go. Let me know if you can see this.
Yep, we see it.
Wonderful. Okay, so so as I mentioned, is that there was so much that I can really talk about. So I'm just going to try to tailor this for as people, as questions kind of come in. But I thought before I get started, I kind of give you a little bit of an introduction about myself and where I come from, in the sense of Diana mentioned that, I've started now, the CEO and founder of an enterprise called Vesta Social Innovation Technologies. And what we're doing is we're building essentially an online and reporting platform for survivors of sexual assault. You might be wondering, well, how did you come to this, right? A lot of people start thinking of social entrepreneurship, that they have to be an expert in the field that they're in. Or when you're starting a company, people are like, well, how much do you know about this space? And so I thought it would be important to share with you that actually a little bit of my background and how it brought me here. So before I actually get started, I just want to let you know that before starting Vesta, actually, I spent about over 15 years in a corporate environment. I worked my way through a large multinational organization, working my way through, and I lived actually in Europe before moving back to Canada. So when I was looking at starting something new, I thought that perhaps I would be starting something in financial services, because that was my background. But what I realized was that during the day, a lot of people say when you're starting your own business is to follow your passion. And I was like, well, what's my passion? This is what I've got my skills in. But what I started to realize was that I was spending my days researching and trying to understand about technology. But what was happening at night was that it was around the time when there was if you're living in Canada, you might recall, there was the Jean Ghomeshi trial that was happening. And it was in and out of the news just about every night. And then there was Bill Cosby that kept coming out in the news. And so what I realized was that at night I was reading about all these things, and that those were the things that were captivating me. And I was getting very angry and upset about what I was hearing on the news and what was out there, and how the individual survivors in both those cases were being talked about and the way they were being treated. And I was just getting angrier and angrier. And I thought, well, somebody's got to do something about this. And then I just thought, well, I guess that could be me, even though I had no experience at all in addressing any kind of gender-based violence. But I thought, wait a minute, well, I've got over 15 years working in a corporate environment. I worked my way through several positions before I got to a leadership position. I understand how sales works. I understand how product works. I understand how product marketing works. And so, well, maybe I do know something. So maybe I could apply it in this space. And so that's what kind of got me on this journey. And so that's what brought us to Vesta. So that's what brought us here today. Okay, so before we get started, I guess I wanted to give you a little bit of an agenda about what we're going to be kind of reviewing today. And so I thought I'd tell you a little bit about Vesta and how we kind of came to be. And I thought I would intersperse that really as I go along, instead of just kind of bulking it all at the front. So like I said, any questions that come up, just let me know. I also thought, what is a social enterprise and what kind of makes it unique? The other things are, like I said, the rewards and challenges of building a social enterprise. And again, those will be interspersed. And then I thought, well, you know, one session to hear one person speak and just hear my perspective might not be as interesting for everyone that's here. And so what I did was I actually reached out to a bunch of social entrepreneurs that I know, and I told them about this session tonight, and I asked them for some of their key learnings. What do they wish they had knew, or somebody had told them, or something that they feel is just important for people to know before they start a social enterprise? And so I'm going to share some of those with you today. It would be interesting to let you know a little bit about what is Vesta. And so instead of me explaining it to you, I thought I'll just play a short little 3-minute video that we can watch. Let me know if you can hear the sound.
Rape and sexual assault are the most underreported crimes worldwide. An estimated 80 to 90% of sexual assaults go unreported annually. In Canada, sexual assault is the most underreported violent crime, with only 5% of incidents reported to the police. Low reporting rates make it near impossible to gauge the true extent of the problem. The reasons survivors don't report range from the emotional, psychological, geographical, cultural, and systemic. Attitudes influenced by rape culture can undermine or harm individuals who report experiences of sexual assault. Justice Canada states that approximately 2/3 of survivors don't have the confidence in the police, the court process, or the criminal justice system in general, and many believe that the personal risks and costs of reporting outweigh the possible advantages, so they don't report. In response to these challenges, Vesta Social Innovation Technologies was born. Vesta is a social enterprise that lives at the intersection of gender-based violence, technology, and access to justice. With the support and funding from Women and Gender Equality Canada, Vesta Community has been developed. Vesta Community is an alternative to reporting directly to police. It draws on academic and primary research in anonymous reporting, trauma-informed interviewing, third-party reporting protocols in Canada, and innovative digital solutions developed around the world. It was developed with feedback from survivors, frontline feminist organizations, and sexual assault centers in Ontario, Canada. No need to download an app. Vesta Community is accessible via the web or on your mobile phone. Survivors can anonymously report to police for intelligence purposes. They can connect with counseling or crisis centers. And for those undecided whether they want to file a formal report, Vesta Community allows them to document and preserve their experience. We're working with local police departments to allow for a less formal way to report to police using Vesta Community. We hope that by encouraging folks to report information anonymously, it will help survivors break their silence and seek help. It will also help police track offenders and make our communities safer. My name is Lucretia Spagnolo, and I'm the founder and CEO of Vesta Social Innovation Technologies.
So that's Vesta. I just thought that might be a quick way to introduce everyone to Vesta. But anyway, how did we get here? You know, that video is new. We just posted it actually about a month or so ago. And I realized that there was quite a bit of a journey to get to where we are now. So I thought I would start really simply by just talking about what is social entrepreneurship. What are social enterprises? We hear more and more about this concept in the last couple of years, and we continue to hear more. And I was really excited actually to hear that that York is actually thinking about launching an incubator for social enterprises. Is that when I even started Vesta 3 years ago, trying to find resources and understanding what social entrepreneurship was and how to go about building a social enterprise was a bit challenging. So it's really exciting to see how many more resources and information that's out there. And because one thing that actually would have been really helpful for me right at the beginning is to understand, I understood the basic was that a social enterprise was really a business that was looking to fix either some kind of social problem, but in a financially sustainable way. So I was like, well, what does that mean? And it means, well, it's not a nonprofit, or it could be a nonprofit, but how is it different from a charity? And it's like, but what it essentially means is that it's an organization that is looking then to not only address some kind of either social, cultural, or even environmental purpose, but also do it in a way that is financially sustainable, which means that it's also trying to make money, and so that it could sustain or have profits, that it could sustain not only itself as a business, but actually have an impact on either the people or the environment in which they are working. So I didn't put it in here specifically, but we've heard a lot about even social enterprises in terms of, some people talk about, you might have heard about B Corps or B corporations, or you've heard about conscious capitalism. And these are all similar types of terminology and several concepts. B Corp is more of a, I guess it's an assessment tool, and it's also a way for organizations then to structure, and they're trying to find ways in which to, if you will, determine what a social enterprise is. Because there's still a lot of ambiguity between what is a social enterprise. And at least in Canada, and I'll go into it a little bit more detail later, but in Canada, there is no difference or specification of a social enterprise. And some countries do have a distinction. I believe in the UK, you can be registered as a social enterprise, and there's certain states in the United States that also allow for it. So the first thing I would suggest is that when you're looking to start a social enterprise, or any organization for that matter, is to really understand the problem you're trying to solve. And so, and I realized that a lot of the lessons that I'll be talking about in the beginning are important for any type of organization you are looking to put together. As Diana mentioned, is that this is one session out of 11, I think you said, right? So there's 11 sessions in the Founder Fundamental Workshop. So all those sessions, anything that has to do with putting together a business, whether you're talking about understanding your business models, whether you're trying to understand how to put together a business case, whether you're talking about value propositions and how you go about doing that, whether you're talking about sales and marketing, all those are important. I didn't put them all in this presentation because I felt that each one of them could also be their own presentation, and you've got those resources already available to you, even through York's platform, right? And through the YouTube channel. So you already have those, and there's a whole bunch of other resources as well that you could look at. I've also added some of those resources in my own presentation to help you. So it'll either then help to go more in depth, as well as also if, just to give a little bit more of an explanation. But the reason I'm highlighting certain ones is because I think that they are of particular importance when building a social enterprise. You know, it's really hard to do this when I have no feedback, but I hope that people understand, and I'll just proceed from here. So, as I mentioned, what is the problem you're trying to solve? That's one of the biggest, it might seem as simple question as possible, but it's actually one of the most difficult, at least I find, for somebody to answer. And the reason is, for example, we mentioned Vesta. We're building an online information and reporting platform for sexual assault. Well, why? What problem are we trying to address? So there's a technique that helps you address and uncover the specific quantifiable problem that you are trying to address. So one of these techniques is called the 5 whys. I really like the 5 whys because it's not easy, to be frank, but it really helps you drill down and try to understand what is something that is small enough for you to tackle, and you can quantify if you've actually made a kind of change. Funny enough, is this was actually created by the Toyota company. So I've linked a video to you to help you understand about the basics and the reasons why it came to be. But I'm going to take you through a quick little exercise that explains the why and use Vesta as an example. So as I mentioned, we're building a reporting tool. So what does that mean? It's like, okay, well, why do you need to build a reporting tool for sexual assault survivors? Can't individuals just call 911? Can't they just go to the police? Well, I started to do some research and I realized that over 95% of individuals, as I think I mentioned in the video, don't file a formal report. So it's like, well, why is that? So it's like, well, maybe they don't want to. If 95% of people don't report, maybe they just don't want to. So is that really a problem you need to fix? So you ask the second why. Well, why don't they want to report? Well, a lot of people came back when we did our research and said, well, what was the point reporting? No one's going to believe me anyway. It's like, oh, why? Why do you think that no one would believe you? Well, even if they didn't believe me, you know, I'm kind of afraid about mentioning it or ashamed about mentioning it. It's like, well, wait a minute. Now you're afraid, that's external, but now you feel ashamed and that's internal. It's like, well, why do you think that, you know, why are you ashamed and why do you think no one's going to believe you? It's like, well, I heard that nothing happens to the offender anyway. You know, you reach the news, you watch things that you hear on TV, and nothing ever happens to the offender. And it's always about what happens to the survivor. So you're like, oh, well, why do you think that nothing's going to happen to the survivor? You're hearing it on the news, but is there another reason? It's like, yeah, actually there is that, well, I mentioned it to a friend of mine and it's somebody I really trust, or I mentioned it to a counselor and they told me not to because nothing ever happens. So it's like, well, wait a minute. Now what I'm hearing is that it's not that they don't want to report. It's not that they don't want to talk about it, because apparently they've been doing a lot of thinking about it. Apparently, they've also been doing maybe some research because they're looking at the news or they're looking online, and then they told somebody. So it's like, well, wait a minute. What percentage of people tell somebody? And then came to realize that actually there's research behind that says that 85% of survivors tell somebody. So they are disclosing. So the gap isn't between the 95% that don't report and the 5% that do. The gap actually is between the 85% who tell somebody. But something happens in that conversation. So then it goes into further research and realizing that, wait a minute, they are interested in talking about it. That's what we have to investigate. So that's the problem we're trying to solve. We're trying to interrupt that cycle, because that first conversation, that first person, or that first thing they refer to, whether they're turning to the internet, whether they're referring to a friend, what's happening is that's dissuading them from moving forward. So if we can interrupt right there that cycle, then maybe we can have an impact. Does that make sense? I'll continue on. So another thing that is incredibly important when you're building a social enterprise is understanding, as I said, you want to be addressing a problem that is quantifiable and that is measurable. So you can see if you're actually having an impact, if you're making a change, right? So then you have to understand, how do you go about measuring that impact? And not only is that important for you as a social entrepreneur and as somebody that's building an organization, but more and more it's becoming important as impact investors, or even as funders. If you're going to any kind of government agency, or like I said, even the investors, they're going to ask about the problem you're trying to solve, and they're going to ask you how you're going to measure that. And there's a variety of different ways of how to measure that. I give as example here 3 of them. So one of them is the UN Sustainable Development Goals. There are now 17 of them. So there's also, the UN Sustainable SDGs, as they're known as for short, is that they are looking to make impact around the world. And so they have a variety of goals. And so Vesta as an organization actually meets 3 of the UN sustainability goals. We meet number 3 actually, which is about health and mental health of individuals. Number 5 is about gender equality. And number 16 is about access to justice. So that's important, because when we're going to apply, let's say for grants or fundings, we have to be able to articulate to them how we're measuring and which goals we're aligned with. But sometimes you're like, you know what, but that sounds so cold and hard. And it's like, how are there other ways of measuring impact? So there's also something called a theory of change, and there's also something called a results framework. The theory of change is really more about, excuse me for a second, I just lost myself there. So this theory of change is really about it's a description of what it is you're trying to do and an illustration of how you would make that change. And so, for example, I would say a theory of change is, as I mentioned earlier, is that we're trying to make an impact at that individual level, right? So individuals then tell somebody and they start reporting. So then we can actually walk it through the story of what happens between that individual report and how then it can have an impact on not just on a local level or on a personal level to the individual, but then how that can have a change on a wider, let's say, community, and how then that could change at a more, that's a national level. So a theory of change kind of takes you through all of that. The results framework is actually something that talks a little bit more about detail. So that goes into, well, what activities will you be doing? And how will those activities then, what kind of short-term, medium-term, and long-term outcomes will come from those? Now, I'm not going to bore you with taking you through Vesta's, theory of change and the results framework. But the important thing here to note is that as an individual and as a social entrepreneur, you're aware of what the different measurements are. And there's also ones that aren't like this at all. There are ones that are more storytelling based. I know one organization where they actually use like images and art therapy, and they do art installations to indicate, right? About how they're impacting or how they're communicating. Because the whole point of this is how do you communicate it back to individuals, to funders, to investors, the impact that you're looking to make. And I'll give you an example in saying that the reason it's important, no matter which metric you use, no matter which theory you would like to use, and which actually is more aligned with your business and what you're trying to do, sometimes you have to at least have a passing understanding of what the others are, because sometimes you're going to find yourself in a situation where you might like to use the storytelling version and use that to demonstrate impact because that illustrates it very well. But when you're in the middle of a grant application or you're in front of an impact investor, they might turn around and say, okay, that's all well and good, but I'd really like to see your results framework. Or how are you aligned with the UN SDGs? So the idea there is that not only are you doing this for your own organization and that you understand it, but also then that you can communicate it in a way that others can understand it. And sometimes they need to see it in a certain way. So as the video mentioned, Vesta is actually funded, our Vesta community platform is funded through a grant from the federal government, from Women and Gender Equality. One of the things we have to do is on a biannual basis, we have to provide them information about how we're measuring that impact. I could use any model that I want internally, but for them, I need to follow their structured format because they are funding organizations that aren't just like Vesta, where we're building a technology-based solution, but they're also funding other kinds of organizations that don't have the kind of metrics or technology or anything behind it. So they need a more of a standardized form so that they can understand. Are there any questions?
No questions so far.
Okay. How's my speed? How's it sounding so far? Okay.
Rachel says good. Emmanuel says good. So I'm guessing the consensus is good.
All right. So, legal structure. As I mentioned, there is no real, in Canada, I realized that at the beginning, Diana mentioned that there's people joining us from other countries. So I'm not sure how this is in all the countries of the world, but in Canada, as we said, there is no specific legal structure for a social enterprise. In Canada, you're either a nonprofit or a for-profit. And you have to make the decision yourself about how you're going to structure your organization. And some of the questions you should be asking yourself are, what are your goals and what are you looking to achieve? And how are you going to achieve those goals? Because you can achieve goals in a variety of different ways, and your approach could be very different, but it might differ when it comes to your legal structure. And the legal structure might be beneficial for different types of goals as opposed to others. So as an example, I thought actually I would mention another organization that is in the same space as Vesta. So there's an organization that it's a wonderful organization. They put out such incredible content and material, and it's called Chain. And Chain is also looking to empower survivors of sexual assault. What they do is very different from what Vesta does. And what they do is they actually have spread in far more countries than we are. And what they are doing is they are putting out a lot of content out online. And what they're doing is they're bringing together a community of volunteers from all around the world. And those volunteers manage the local Chain website. So individuals that say in Italy have access to Italian resources, and individuals in Canada have access to information in Canada. So that's incredible. And they were able, so one of the things, so they've structured themselves as a nonprofit. And what happens is they have all these volunteers that are now volunteering to write on their website and put out this information, and they manage all the local chapters. And that's amazing, right? It's a little different from what we were looking to do. So the structure that I followed was a little different. So Vesta actually is structured as a for-profit business. And the reasons I looked at it were many. And as I'll take you through them, I'll take you through some of the other issues, then I'll intersperse that why that was in there as well. So it was really important to understand how you're going to be addressing those goals is really important. And that kind of feeds into the advantages and disadvantages, if you will, of for or nonprofit. And the way I structured this is because a lot of times what I get asked more than anything else is about funding and financing. And so I structured it in the form of funding and financing in terms of questions. There is other pros and cons. This is not an exhaustive list by any stretch of the imagination, but I just thought it would give you some of the ones that would be something to talk about in just a couple of minutes. So one of the advantages, and one of the ones that I particularly looked at, is that you have different kind of funding options. Now, when you start looking at as a for-profit entity, then you have access also to impact investors. And those are impact investors, if you're not aware, is a subsect, if you will, of investors, of like whether, a lot of people are more familiar with angel investors or with VCs like venture capital. Impact investors tend to be more institutional. So meaning they're more similar to a venture capitalist in the sense that it's not one individual that's giving you funding, but rather it's a group of individuals, and they're structured the same as a venture capitalist would. But what they're looking at on their returns is that they're not just looking for financial returns like a venture capitalist would, but they're also looking at your social impact, and they're going to be very interested in how you're measuring that impact. So I just thought for us, it opened up that whole other market and that whole other opportunities for us. And so that was one of the factors that I considered. The other one also was that as we looked at, obviously, profits, we also looked at sustainability. And for me, this one was really important because when I went forward, when I started thinking about nonprofits, because there are limits on profits and revenues and how much must be reinvested back into the organization if you're listed as a nonprofit or a charity in Canada, then I was concerned that since our solution has a significant technological component and we were tech heavy, essentially, I was concerned that if I was structured as a nonprofit, that then I would be limited in being able then to finance our tech build. And the other thing that was really important to me was that our mission and objectives were really oriented, and that we were really looking towards our social orientation and making sure that we wanted to make social impact, and that it would be easier then to align with investors, in the sense of a lot of people talk about, and I'm sure there's sessions out there that talk about when you're looking at investors for your enterprise, is that it's very important to find investors that are aligned with your organization, and for a variety of reasons. And I thought as a social enterprise, if I could lead with that in the room, it would in fact weed out a lot of individuals. And for me, I thought that was a positive as opposed to a negative, so that I then knew that we were starting with common goals, and I wouldn't have to be concerned about that, because somebody who's not interested in a social enterprise and is not interested in social impact wouldn't even consider investing in a social enterprise.
Lucretia, before you move on, we do have a question in the chat, and Teresa is asking if she has both, can she combine it?
I'm not sure I understand if you have both a for-profit and a nonprofit, if you can combine it.
Yeah, Teresa, can you clarify? Yes, she says yes.
Yes. So interesting question. And honestly, I don't know for sure. I would probably consult with a lawyer in whatever jurisdiction you're in to be sure. I know that some organizations have a for-profit and a nonprofit arm, or sometimes what they have is their social, so they do kind of distinguish the two organizations, but from a legal perspective, I would suggest speaking to a lawyer about how you would merge that or how you can, because social entrepreneurship also is different from corporate social responsibility. So sometimes what happens is you have organizations where they are for-profit businesses, but they also invest heavily in social purpose. And so as a segment of their business is that they've got what they call their corporate social responsibility goals, but it's not categorized as a social enterprise. So I hope that kind of helped. But again, I think the best thing to do would really be to consult a lawyer.
Great.
Any other questions pop up?
Nope, that's all the questions we have.
Okay. So some of the disadvantages is that in Canada, at least, you're taxed just like a regular business, just as if you're a for-profit with no social purpose behind you, which unfortunately means a higher rate. You cannot rely on tax-deductible donations. So you can't really have then, at least in Canada, in other jurisdictions, I think you can be a social enterprise and you're able to take tax-deductible donations, but not in Canada. So, and also there are some forms of not just government funding, but either institutional funding and some of the other ones that you also could not apply to. And the other one that for me was really important was this last one, was that there's a risk as a, this was kind of like I had to be careful because I really had to think hard about this one, because there is a risk when you're registered as a for-profit entity that future directors or shareholders, even if it takes a majority rule, could change the actual mission or priorities of the company by changing the corporate charter. And so that was something I had to think long and hard about. And so one of the things that I did to try to mitigate this in the future is that, as I mentioned earlier, there's also like B corporations is a certification program, right, for organizations. Well, one of the things that B Corp has is that they have a suggested legal structure. And what it is that they suggest that there's an added clause in the founding articles of incorporation of the company that they suggest you incorporate, that it essentially says that future shareholders and future directors must also consider not just when we're considering any kind of proposals or any kind of motions in front of them, that they just don't consider financial costs or consequences, but they must also consider the social purpose of the organization. It's not foolproof, but it was a way I thought of kind of taking an idea from a B Corp and also how to mitigate some of the disadvantages of being a for-profit entity as we move into the future.
So before you move on, we have another question in the chat, and this one comes from Rose. She's asking, do people buy shares into your social enterprise? Is that how directors and shareholders get involved?
So you can, as a social enterprise, because again, you're at the legal base of it is that we're still structured as a for-profit organization. So from a legal perspective, if we wanted to issue shares, we can. And that we can then look at shares or stock options like compensation packages the same way a for-profit non-social enterprise would look at it.
And a couple more questions are coming in related to that. Next one is from David. He's asking if you can have controlling voting power like Mark from Facebook.
Yes, you can. Just like any other, again, I'm not a lawyer, so please take everything I tell you with just based on my experience, and that I don't actually have a legal degree, but, and I can't practice law anywhere, but yes, I mean, as an organization, as a founder and CEO of the organization, I can make those decisions as to how much shares and how much equity I then share or give for, whether it's funding, whether it's for to bring people on. So yes, as a for-profit, then I can determine what those percentages are. And that's something that's negotiable, just like it would be for any other for-profit organization.
Okay, and one final question regarding that is from Rose again. Is there a private social enterprise versus public social enterprise?
I have never actually heard of those terms. So I honestly can't answer that question. I don't know.
Oh, so it's Rose here.
Oh, hi.
So the reason why I asked that question is that on the for-profit side or the corporate side, there are public corporations and private corporations. So I'm just curious whether if you're a social enterprise, whether there is such a thing as public versus.
Oh, you meant in that format. Sorry, I misunderstood the question. And yes, thank you for clarifying. So yes, you can, because I'll give you an example. I believe Patagonia, or I'm not sure if I think Ben & Jerry's has now been purchased. Oh, I can't remember if it's, at least Ben & Jerry's was. I think now they've been purchased and they're part of a larger organization. I can't remember if it's like Unilever or it's one of the other large consumer organizations and companies. But they were, yes, social enterprises, and Patagonia is a social enterprise. So you can, I think, have both. And yes, and because social enterprise also, as I said, there is no, at least to date in this country, there's no legal definition of one. So you're either a for or non. So if you're a for-profit, then you can follow all the same, the path that any for-profit organization can.
All right, it's Rose again. I have one more question. I'm just trying to understand all this. So my next question is, Patagonia and Ben & Jerry, those to me sound more like cooperatives. So are cooperative social enterprises?
They can be. They can be. And that's what I mean about that's why it was really challenging, honestly, to put together a presentation, because I knew that I couldn't answer all the questions. So a little later on, I'm going to talk about some of the different structures. And I didn't include a cooperative, but a cooperative can very well be a social enterprise. So like in Canada, we have MEC, right? And there was a big uproar, and it was Mountain Equipment Co-op, because they are a co-op. And there was a big uproar that they were bought by a larger investment firm. And so the employees actually were very upset, as were some of the general public, because they were sold into a larger organization that maybe won't have the same values.
Great. Those are all the questions we have. Before we move on, I actually do want to mention that we have a really great legal session coming up. So if you have any legal specific questions, you can save it for that session coming up on March 4th, and we'll link it in the chat as well.
Oh, that's perfect. You see, that's a perfect example of saying that a lot of the issues and questions that will be coming up as you're trying to build your social enterprise are going to be the exact same questions that other entrepreneurs have. So please take advantage of any resources that are out there. Don't just look for resources that are specifically geared towards social enterprises, because you're going to have the same kind of questions. So to that end, then another thing that was really important for me was, again, when considering for-profit or nonprofit, was the role of directors versus advisors. And when you're a nonprofit, you have a requirement to have a board of directors. And some larger organizations have both a board of directors and a board of advisors. Now, what's important is, without going into all the minutia and all the details, but I thought what was really important to summarize is that a board of directors are people that actually manage the CEO and help manage the business. So they have to approve all key decisions, and their job is to protect the interests of the shareholders, right? So as you were asking before, whether it could be a private or public, so there could be shareholders involved. So that means that the board of directors can make fundamental changes and decisions that could change the course of the organization. A board of advisories actually is less formal. They're more mentors, and they're the ones that they consult, and they actually then can provide expertise, but they don't actually have decision-making authority. So I'll give you an example that's not mine, actually, but I know an organization, they're a social enterprise, and they're structured as a nonprofit. And they've been spending, so the CEO was telling me about how she was working on a project for about 6 months or so. And some of the issues are challenging issues, as you can imagine. So it takes time to try to come to a resolution or try to find how to fix a solution. And I didn't ask her before this if I can use her name, so I'm not going to go into the specific details. But one of the things was, then the chairman of the board called her up one night and said, you know that project we've been working on for 6 months, it's taking too long. Really, if we haven't found a solution by now, then I think we should just let it go and focus our energies elsewhere. And the CEO and the founder was so upset by that, because she felt that it was fundamental. It was a fundamental step in their overall goals. And unfortunately, it was having this conversation with the chairman of the board, who could essentially tell her to stop and focus elsewhere. Now, on a happy note, I found out that they did come to a resolution. They did have a conversation. She was very upset, but they found a compromise, and they have found a way to move forward where it meets both the needs of the board of directors and the CEO. But that conversation wouldn't necessarily happen in a for-profit organization, at least at this level. And I should clarify that. Everything I'm talking about is a social enterprise that is not a publicly traded social enterprise. So on the stock market, that's a different beast altogether, and so outside of my scope of expertise. So I won't go down that path. So again, I mentioned it earlier, was that one of the things that is really important, and your corporate structure and your legal structure has a direct impact on, are your funding opportunities and your options. So there are certain things, like I mentioned earlier, that I thought as a for-profit, then it opened up the world, if you will, of impact investors. Okay, but what that also does, though, is it limits certain funding that we can apply for. So I'll give you an example. There are certain foundations here in Canada whose mandates align very clearly with Vesta's mandates. So Canadian Women's Foundation, for one, the Law Foundation, those are two ones that, as an example, that their missions align very closely to what we're doing. But unfortunately, their mission, for me, it's unfortunate, is that they only fund nonprofit entities. And so that is something that I cannot access without changing our structure. So that is something to kind of take under consideration, because something that someone didn't tell me, or I didn't understand well enough at the beginning, was that there's different types of funding that you seek out at different levels of the organization. And if you're having a funding session, I strongly encourage you to go to a funding session and several funding sessions. Is that so at the beginning, a lot of startups really start with pitch competitions or government funding, and they look for small grants. As your organization grows, and as then you have your in-market, as then you start to show traction, that's when you start to then attract somebody like an impact investor. So that's an investor that you would have later on in your journey, not somebody that you would have early in your journey. So it's something that you really have to consider, because, you know, one of the number one reasons why startups fail, no matter what kind of startup it is lack of funding and cash flow. So it's not an insignificant question to really evaluate. And there are so many sources out there, but I thought I would at least add a link to some of the Government of Canada financing available for social enterprises. This is like the tip of the iceberg. I would definitely say, if you're looking, is to just do as much research as possible and leverage organizations, leverage like York University if you can, to help you find where those sources of funding can come from.
I see a few questions coming in the chat. So Rose is wondering if there are any social enterprises on the stock market, and do you know of any that you can name? She's just still trying to understand the concept of it.
You know, I can't think of one just because it's coming up later in my presentation. I almost don't want to give it away. I'm trying to think if there are others. Rose, can you hold on till the last slide to see if we can answer that question for you? And honestly, I think, Rose, I'm not sure you're going to be satisfied even with the last slide, because it's not black and white. And I'm not sure I can give you a black and white answer. But after this session, I'd be happy. There's my contact information at the end. I'd be happy to have a conversation with you or anyone else that wants to kind of do a deep dive in some of these questions, because I don't want to give you a flippant answer, because they're hard questions that you really have to ask yourself.
Rose is totally fine with that. And so let's move on to the next question. It comes from Laura. Can you change from a for-profit to a not-for-profit?
Yeah. So again, it would require a change in legal structure. So that requires, there are requirements you'd have to meet to be a for or a nonprofit. So you would have to engage legal counsel, and they would have to walk you through what changes you'd have to make to your structure in order to change from one to another. And again, it would be really dependent on what your organization is and what you're trying to do and how that would impact you on a short, medium, and long term.
Okay, sounds good. I think we are good for questions now.
Okay, and now for some reason my slides aren't moving. There we go. Okay, so what is your business model and how will you make it sustainable? I think I need to speed up a little bit, thinking of like the time we're at, but so one of the things I wanted to focus on here is that it's really important, as I said, a social enterprise is that you're looking at profits and revenue, and you're looking at making a social impact. So there's this challenge that's actually out there, and it's called serving two masters. So as a social entrepreneur, you always have to have both hats on. You have to understand that the decisions that you're making and whatever product or service that you're offering in market, that you're considering the fact that which master are you serving at that time? Are you following which one's going to be your guiding star? So which one will you be focusing on more than the other, or will you strike a balance between trying to generate profit or making a social impact? And I've got something a little slides over that maybe will be a better explanation of that. So this is one of the questions I think earlier we were asked about what type of business models are there for social enterprises. And you can be just about any. There's 4 that I'm going to mention. Earlier, somebody asked about a co-op. You can be a co-op. It wasn't one of the ones that I mentioned, but I'll go through these rather quickly. And I would also suggest going out there and looking at, I also, like I said, listed some resources here. This was actually coming from Acumen Academy, and just so some of the resources that are out there for you. So a product company, take a breath, is a company that does business to business or business to consumer. So somebody like Tom's. So Tom's Shoes, his model is pretty simple. They manufacture and sell shoes, but their social branch does a 1-for-1 model. 1 pair of shoes bought, 1 pair of shoes donated. Another type of organization is a service company. Now, sometimes we think of service companies like hospitals or schools, and that's true. Those do provide a service. But so does, for example, a company called Cleanable. What they do is that they offer cleaning services for companies. But what's interesting and what makes them a social enterprise is that what they're doing is actually is who they employ, and that they're creating employment opportunities for individuals that are having challenges. And so, again, in the interest of time, I'm not going to click through and take you through Cleanable's story, but you can click on that later to find out more. But that's a way that what they're doing is they're servicing a community and they're finding employment for them. But what they're doing is they're making money by still then providing a service to a for-profit company that will then pay for those services. A platform company. Vesta is a platform company, but then so are others. A platform company is one really that there's 3 parties involved. So there would be an individual consumer, there would be the company, and there could be another organization. So an organization like Ashoka, where Ashoka is a foundation, and what they do actually is they link social entrepreneurs, and they have a whole bunch of programming in place to support those social entrepreneurs. So Ashoka and the next one could also be considered a market company. Sometimes platform companies and market companies can be similar, because a platform is somewhere where an individual then went to their website to try to find resources, and somebody else was providing those resources for the companies. A market company, for example, is one that matches, let's say, a buyer and a seller. So a lot of people that they can think of like Airbnb and Uber, and they don't necessarily are social enterprises, but an organization like Kiva that does micro loans is that what it does is it creates a marketplace. So individual entrepreneurs that are looking for small loans, like $1,000, $5,000, can be matched with individuals that want to actually then invest. So Kiva, just like Ashoka, could be both a market or a platform company. You don't have to be one or the other. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the social business model canvas because, as I mentioned, there's different types of companies. And even as Rose mentioned in your question earlier, like there is no one way to go about social entrepreneurship. And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the business model canvas, and there's courses on it. I've given links to provide. But what this is simply a way for an individual, as they're trying to map out what structure they want to take. It's a tool that was actually created not for social enterprises, but for businesses. And it's one of the lean business models that's out there to help organizations then understand what their go-to-market is and figure out, who are your customers, what's your market, what's your value proposition, how will you pay for it? And so there are separate courses directly on this, but it's some way to give you an idea and a tool so that you as an individual could start to understand what kind of structure do you want to take and what kind of business model do you want to have. So another thing that's important is also when you're thinking about what kind of business do you want to have, what is the impact you want to make, and as I mentioned earlier, it's kind of like this idea of serving two masters. So as a social enterprise, you're looking at then making sure you have a financially sustainable business, but you also want to have social impact. There's going to be a time in every social entrepreneur's journey where you're going to be put to the test. And I wanted to share a story of Crystal Earl. She's an incredible social entrepreneur, and she gave me permission to use her story because I thought this really helped understand what it means by you have to make that decision. So Crystal's is that she owns a company called Brave Souls, and what they do is they repurpose tires into shoes and now other kinds of accessories. She started the business when she was actually visiting the Dominican Republic, and she realized that there was tires being burned. And what was happening is they were releasing toxic fumes into the community where she was, but realized that the community still needed to work at the landfill where they were. And so unfortunately, they were relying on economically, they were reliant on the landfill, but unfortunately, working there and then burning those tires was actually creating challenges in their own community and really damaging the environment. So she wanted to find a way then to repurpose those tires so they wouldn't have to be burned, and that it would be another way for them to be employed without actually damaging the environment or themselves. And so, as you can imagine, that's a challenging, that's an incredible idea, but also challenging from a financing perspective. So in her journey at one point, she caught the attention of one of the large international tire manufacturers. Now you can imagine somebody like that wanting to partner with a small social enterprise, the impact it could have on not just on her bottom line, but it would help her address so many of the supply chain and value chain problems or issues that she was trying to address. Unfortunately, they couldn't come to a decision. And part of that had to do with the fact that they were asking for certain terms, and she would have to walk away from the community in the Dominican Republic. So what do you do as a social enterprise? Do you then partner with a large multinational? Or do you stay the course with what you're doing so you can help the community and communities like it? So I thought that was a great way to illustrate the push and pull of growth. And that leads to my next point, which is you really need to know what is your North Star. What are the values? What are the activities? What is the impact that you are not willing to trade? That those are non-negotiables. And those are important, not just in conversations with possible partners, but I'll give you an example is that at Vesta, one of our North Stars is that we're so focused on the survivor that we realize that one of the things that's most important for survivors is that their information is secure, and that they want to stay, if they want to stay anonymous, they can stay anonymous. So when I have conversations with our developers and we're building out roles and permissions into our platform, and we have to make a decision about what kind of roles are we creating, I always have them defer and think about our North Star. Our North Star is the survivors, the security of the survivors' information and their right to privacy. That determines all the decisions. And it makes it so much easier to make those decisions. There are some competitive advantages. I feel like, sometime along the lines, like, oh my goodness, I'm telling them all these like bad things, things you have to consider, but there are also some great advantages to being a social enterprise. One of the things that is fundamental, and I think actually York has a whole lesson on this, is building the founding team and how important teams are to building any kind of organization. Well, one of the advantage to having a social enterprise is that you end up attracting, or it's easier to attract people, a network, and resources that resonate with your mission and with your purpose. And so a lot of people talk about, well, when you're looking to hire and the type of individuals that you hire, especially at a startup, you want people that go above and beyond, or they can do multiple jobs. And one of the things is that it's easier to attract talent when your mission and your purpose aligns with theirs. And frankly, I use that one as an example because I'm very fortunate that I get phone calls and calls from individuals where I actually then, when I'm looking to fulfill roles, I'm fortunate that I already have, if you will, a warm list of individuals that have already expressed interest and they want to work on the mission. So I'm just going to stick with that one in the interest of time, unless somebody's got any kind of questions.
There are a couple of questions in the chat. Do social enterprises charge more for products usually?
I really, when it comes to pricing and pricing strategies, they'd be the same thing that you would be looking at again, whether you're a for or nonprofit, or whether or not you're a social enterprise, may or may not impact your pricing strategy. But I don't think there's a hard and fast rule that you charge more. I think sometimes if I've understood the question, is sometimes you hear about, well, this is sustainably sourced, right? So if you want to buy a t-shirt, sustainably sourced cotton can be more expensive than fast fashion, right? So think of like a $5 t-shirt on sale at H&M, that I can't imagine how that could be sustainably sourced. I know a great social entrepreneur that you'd want to talk to if that's what you're interested in. So in certain cases, it can end up costing more, but I'm not sure that's a blanket statement I would make across the board.
Okay, and we have another question from David, and he's asking, what if the government forces you to give out the victim info? What do you do then?
If the government forces us, like, I'm not sure I understand. Like, do you mean if we are subpoenaed? Like, for example, how could we be compelled to divulge that information is where I think you're asking. So that's under court order. Well, there's certain things that we can actually build from a technology perspective that would stop us from being able to do that. So the information is completely anonymized, and no one, not even Vesta, has access to it without having a unique password and record key combination, which we don't track and keep, the survivor does. So even if we were compelled, we don't have it.
Okay.
But that's a great question. Sorry, yeah. I just wanted to add, because it's a great question, because you see that goes back to our North Star, right? There are so many questions that came up about how are we going to anonymize that data? How are we going to encrypt it? Are we going to look at de-encryption keys? What are we going to build? How are we going to build it? So David, that's a fantastic question, because it reminds again how we go look at how we make decisions, and how something like your North Star and your purpose and your mission impact every decision, all the way down to the type of encryption you use.
Great. Those are all the questions we have so far in the chat.
Perfect. So I also wanted to talk a little bit about some of the criticisms about social entrepreneurship and social enterprises. So as we said, you're dealing with two masters, and sometimes individuals or organizations might be leaning more towards, let's say, the profit side than they are the social mission side. Or some organizations call themselves a social enterprise, but individuals or society thinks that they're either like examples and terms that are kind of being used are greenwashing or pinkwashing. So what that means is greenwashing is that you're actually saying that you're building products and you're investing money in the environment, but at the same time, the product that you're building is made out of plastic that will take 100 years to biodegrade. And so there's a disconnect between what you're saying and what you're doing. And so there are some criticisms that some organizations are calling themselves social enterprises or social purpose organizations, but they're not actually doing what they say they're doing. So, all right. So the next section really is about not so much about the nuts and bolts about the social enterprise, but I want to talk to you a little bit about, these are the questions that I went out and asked my community and said, what were the things that you wished you knew before? Or what are the lessons that are really hard learned? Or maybe it's a lesson you keep learning over and over again because you still haven't learned it yet. So, one of the most important things is everybody is going to tell you or ask you, what's your story? Tell me about yourself. What's the problem you're trying to solve? Storytelling is so important, especially in a social enterprise. That's how people understand. That's how people connect to your mission, to what you're trying to do. But I really wish that early on I had understood in a better way what the storytelling means. So there's a difference with, when I heard this quote, I was like, it's brilliant. So Brene Brown says that storytelling is data with a soul. And I was like, this is brilliant. Because when someone says, well, you know, why did you build Vesta? Well, you know, I had this epiphany. I wanted to help survivors of sexual assault. And this is the path I'm going on because I think that individuals are really struggling. That's not impactful. But if I start talking and say something along the lines of, you know, last year before COVID-19, according to the United Nations, 243 million women and girls between the ages of 15 and 49 experienced some form of physical or sexual assault. Since March 2020, since the beginning of lockdown, countries around the world are indicating that there has been a spike in as much as 25 to 30% in cases of gender-based violence. But the reporting rate remains unchanged at 5%. And why is that? Well, it's because reporting is confusing, it's hard to control, and it seems that there is no accountability for the offender. So that's different than what I said earlier. I was talking to an investor, I'm talking to somebody about a grant. That's the way I tell the story. I talk about facts, I mention my sources, but I put it in a story that people can understand. And I've also given you here as resources is examples of social entrepreneurs pitching, and they do a great job of storytelling. The other thing that I wanted to mention is relationships and networks. So a lot of people will talk about relationship building, right? And how important it is to, as you launch an organization, how important it is for you then to build proper relationships. Well, they're especially important if you're trying to build a social enterprise and you're especially in a place where you're trying to be part of a community that you may not already be a part of. So as I mentioned, my background is actually in corporate. I worked for a large multinational, international payments, and foreign currencies. So when I started to talk about Vesta in the beginning, I had a lot of individuals saying, oh, so you're not a lawyer? No. So have you worked at a sexual assault center? Have you worked at a shelter? No. Are you a police officer? No. So they were like, why should we trust you? Why should you know? Why should you have the answers to this? So building those relationships and those networks was so important. So I was one day sitting in an incubator or an accelerator. So I strongly suggest, if you have the opportunity, I think I heard Diana mention that there's an application that's due tomorrow. I strongly suggest finding your networks and being part of programs. As an example, I was sitting in an incubator space, and it so happened that the then Attorney General of Ontario came to visit that day. So I had 2 minutes of her time. In those 2 minutes, I told her about Vesta. She said, oh my goodness, that is amazing. And then she walked away. And I kicked myself because I was like, oh my God, but the Attorney General, she thinks what we're doing is amazing. What am I going to do? I need to leverage. How do I get her back? Well, I couldn't get her back. But what I did do was the next day, I emailed the innovation office at the Ministry of the Attorney General and said, hey, I got to meet the Attorney General yesterday. I told her what Vesta does. She thinks what we're doing is amazing. I'd love to come talk to you about what we're building so that you can see how amazing it is. And so what was he going to say? He said yes. And so I had 15 minutes of his time, which turned into an hour. And then he said, you know, I'm not the right person to help you, but let me connect you to our victims of crime department. They might be better able to help you. Victims of crime, having a conversation with victims of crime helped me then connect to the Ontario Coalition of Rape Crisis Centers. So they were like, well, you know, there's some of the challenges you're having, but where we can help you is maybe you're not calling the right people. Let me connect you. And so do you see how one conversation, you kind of connect the dots, and those building those relationships then, and going back to those individuals and giving them updates, and then leveraging not just their networks, but that those networks become part of our networks. So those are so important when you're building a social enterprise.
We have a question from David, and he's asking, should your story include a persona and not just statistics?
It can, absolutely. I've tried it. It doesn't feel natural for me. So I don't use it personally, but I have seen it used exceptionally well, where individuals then have a persona and they share it and have their storytelling through that. I would, though, still suggest to make sure you've got some of the data in there, and so that it helps people understand and it helps them quantify what it is you're talking about. Any other questions?
Nope. That's all I see.
So, you know, earlier we talked about your North Star, right? And we talked about how important it is about your mission, and it's important about knowing what your purpose is and what your outcomes are and what you're trying to achieve. Well, one of the things that is incredibly important is really making sure that you have value-based alignment when you're talking to potential partners. And this is so important when you're talking, especially, this is important in all organizations. I feel like I'm repeating myself 1,000 times, but I can't help myself because they really are. But when it comes to a social enterprise, it is especially important because you want to make sure that your values are aligned, because then you know that any kind of decisions that are made and any actions that happen on either side are going to actually benefit the common goals you have together. And as an example, I want to talk to you a little bit about an organization called Ample Labs. And what they do is they've built a chatbot that really is about addressing homelessness. And one of their key partners actually is with 211 Ontario. And so 211 Ontario actually is a nonprofit organization that is a database of information for social services across Ontario. So as you can imagine, when Ample Labs was building this chatbot to help the homeless seek out and find basically shelters, where they can go for food, what is available in their communities, that having a database where they can draw that information from was critical to their development. But they also realized that trying to build that kind of database, it's outside of their scope. So is there somebody out there who actually already builds these databases? And it's like, yeah, actually they do. And 211 Ontario's values are very similar to Ample's Labs values, right? Where they're trying to help individuals that are Ontario-based individuals that are looking for resources and don't know where to go look. And they need help. And that's exactly what Ample is doing. So that is a really good value-based partnership. This one was a big one for me. When Angelique mentioned this to me, I was like, I have to mention this. So as we mentioned, as you're starting a social enterprise, one of the things is you reach out and you talk to as many people as you can, right? You're gonna talk to so many experts. And one of the things that she said to me was that I listen for heart, not just expertise. And I was like, what do you mean by that? So there are a lot of experts out there, and there's going to be individuals that are going to tell you, to help you understand the ecosystem, the processes, the procedures that are currently in place, and all the reasons why, or all the challenges that are currently in those. And there's a lot of people that are going to tell you about what you should be doing and shouldn't be doing. She said what was important for her, and she's building, so Fingerprints is actually a platform that brings together mentors and mentees. What that means is student mentors, so students tutoring other students. So that's a university grade student that is mentoring somebody that's in high school, for example, based on their learning styles, because not everybody learns the same way. So as you can imagine, there was a lot of education experts she spoke to. And what she said was she learned that there was an indicator that she started to realize the ones that resonated with her and the ones that whose advice mattered more to her. And those were the ones that weren't just in the, educators and they'd been educated for X number of years. There was a lot of people that had that expertise, but it was those individuals then who were, trying to make change. Those individuals that were looking at different methods. They weren't just looking at what was wrong. They were spending their evenings and their weekends and their off hours trying different things or volunteering their time or trying to find the solution. And she said, those were the individuals that were helpful for me. And I thought that was a great lesson because there's so many voices. Which ones do you listen to? This was another one that was a big one, and that was the man in the arena. This is actually a quote from a speech that Theodore Roosevelt gave, and it follows actually the path of what I had just mentioned with the heart versus the expertise. What I thought was interesting is that I found out that LeBron James actually writes this on his shoes to remind himself of this quote. So as we talked about those experts and individuals, some of them are not experts, but they still feel qualified to tell you all the things you're doing wrong in your organization, is that this is a reminder to listen to the voice of the man in the arena. And that means that individual who has been there, that individual who has been in the arena and who has been knocked down, who's been, pushed around, but that person keeps getting up and trying again. And those individuals are really important to have around you. The other thing I wanted to mention is because we hear a lot in especially technology and in startups about sprints, about tech sprints and how you need to build fast and break things. So when I think of social entrepreneurship, I think of it as a marathon or maybe even as a relay race. So it's a series of things that will happen, especially when you're talking about social entrepreneurship and you're talking about delivering services or a product, when you're talking about vulnerable or marginalized populations. really be conscious about thinking about the products or services that you're putting out there. And also not just from a tech perspective, but sometimes when you're trying to go up against forces, when you're talking about systemic change. When I talk about Vesta's overall mission, I talk that we're on a mission to end rape culture. Think about that for a second. I can't do that in a sprint. That's going to take years. And I know that we're one of the steps, one of the cogs in the chain to get us there. So when I think about it, I have to think about the fact that I'm in it for the long haul. This isn't going to be a short return where you flip the business in 2 years. It might be, but I've never seen it happen. And I have to think about it as a marathon.
So we got another question in the chat before you move on. It's kind of related to what you were talking about before. But how would you suggest making contact with other individuals passionate about starting a social enterprise?
Oh my goodness. There's honestly, the best thing I would say is talk to as many people as you can. Not only is it about Google and the internet and looking for specific resources, but sometimes it's the random person that will connect you. And you will find, actually, it leads perfectly into this. Community is everything. When I say community, I don't mean relationship building. I mean as an individual, as a person. It is challenging and you want to have the right people around you. And as that, I'll give you an example. I was at an event, for those of you that are based in Ontario and based in and around Toronto, I was at Mars. So I was at Mars as an incubator based in Toronto. I was at one of their events. I happened to sit down. There was a woman sitting beside me who I'd never met before. And she said, what brought you here? So I told her about Vesta and she said, oh my God, you need to go and talk to the Social Ventures Zone. And I had no idea what she was talking about. And so she then put me in touch with another space that was based out of Ryerson University, and that we were talking about, they had an incubator for social enterprises. I had never heard of it before. So that was a random conversation. There are others like it now. There, I think somebody mentioned early on that CSI, that's also based in Toronto, they also have space and resources and supports for people that are based in Toronto. And so I would say talk to as many people as you can, because the community and the individuals, that's going to be super important, because as you're trying to build your organization, and sometimes there's just going to be challenges like logistics, and you need somebody who's been there with you, or sometimes you just want to bang your head against the wall because you've heard the 1,000th no. And you need to have that person whose shoulder you can cry on, or that person who says, you know what, I know who else you should be talking to. Or, yes, this sucks. So it's about that personal support. I hope that answered the question at the same time. The other thing is it feeds into it as well, is define your why. You'll hear this a lot. This is not just about the social purpose of the organization, but it's you as an individual. As we said, or as I mentioned earlier, there's going to be individuals that are going to say this doesn't work. There's going to be individuals that say you're on the wrong path. You're going to hear a lot more no's than yeses. So understanding your why, the reason why you as an individual are doing this, is really important, because that's the reason you're going to stay up late. That's the reason when you've got a grant application that's due the next day, or that you're going to work until 1 a.m. I'm not going to say I don't propose that anybody has a really bad work-life balance, but what I'm saying is that there's going to be times and there's going to be hurdles and there's going to be challenges. And so if you're not clear on why you're doing this, it's going to be a lot easier to let go and just say, you know what, I'm tapping out. This isn't for me anymore. And that could very well be right, but at least you know what that is. I also wanted to mention that this is, I don't know if this is a lesson for as an individual, but one thing that's important is timing can have a really big impact on your success as a social entrepreneur. And somebody once said to me that at the beginning, you could be ignored. And then as you start to get traction, you can start then either being feared or even criticized. So as an example, when I first started and I started talking to as many people as I could about Vesta, I got a lot of what I call pats on the head. Oh, that's a great idea. Or a lot of little whispers. It was like, oh, that's great. But no real concrete help. Or I was told, well, you don't have the expertise, and so we're not going to partner with you. And so we completely ignored and dismissed. Then, as we started to get traction, as we started to get funding, as we started to build a team, I thought it was fascinating that some of those individuals actually that had said no in the beginning came back and actually were angry because they thought that now what was happening was almost in some way illegitimate or wasn't because it hadn't been sanctioned by them. And so it was very interesting because just seeing how you will be interpreted or how people will interpret you on your path may change their perception of you, and not to take it personally. Because I can also talk about timing. It almost seems like I can't talk about Vesta and I can't talk about timing without talking about me too. I can't tell you how many people at the beginning said to me, this isn't a tech problem. This is not something that could be solved by technology. This is something that is a human problem with a human solution. No one will ever want to do counseling online. No one will ever want to use the internet. And nobody wants to talk about it. Well, Google Me Too. You'll find millions of people talking about it. So all of a sudden that knocked out that problem, if you will, or that objection that people had. And the other thing is that, well, since COVID-19, what do you mean people don't want to go online? Everybody now is online, and everybody showed that everything from medical services to meetings, everything can be moved online. Those are factors outside of my control, but they have significantly impacted our journey. And so one of the other lessons is about learning to distill and analyze. And you're going to get a lot of information. There's going to be a lot of research and a lot of people telling you things and a lot of stuff you're going to see online. But what are the ones that are most important? So the example I used at the beginning, right, was that when I talked about the 5 whys, I talked about one of the stats we hear the most are that 95% of people don't report. And so there's this assumption that they don't want to talk about it and that only 5% are reporting. And when I started doing the whole customer journey map and trying to see where we could affect change, what I realized is there was so many parts along the path that it was challenging to understand where could we affect change. But the most important detail was actually when we realized about that 85%. On that customer journey, I realized that the most important statistic and most important thing I found in the research was that 85% tell somebody. That was critical to realizing if we can affect change here at this point, we can then affect change at everywhere else along the journey map. So I hope that clarifies that. And lastly, this is the last slide. I just wanted to say that as we talked about, there is no one definition of a social enterprise. And there's a lot of organizations, whether they take on the label themselves or other people put the label on them, that they are social enterprises. So I wanted to put this out there and say, if you see this mission, our mission is to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy. Is this a social enterprise? And in the interest of time, I guess this could go right into like question and answer period. Let me tell you whose mission this is. This is Tesla's. So Tesla. Somebody asked earlier, it might have been Rose, can you be publicly traded? Tesla's publicly traded. Is Tesla a social enterprise? I leave that up to you. So that's it. Those are all the slides, except for I added some more slides and resources if anybody's interested on how to build a social purpose or social enterprise company, how to help you work through some of this, the strategy questions that we asked earlier on. And that's it. I hope this was helpful and that this helps you understand a little bit better what is a social enterprise.
Thank you so much for that. A lot of great insight into, what exactly is a social enterprise, because it does get sometimes confusing for people, given the different definitions out there. But I think let's go straight to the questions. Again, if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat, or you can use the raise hand function under reactions, and then you'll be able to unmute your mic when we let you come on. To ask your question. But the first question that we do have is coming from David. How do social impact companies compete against or work with each other?
I'm not sure I understand the question in the sense of, again, how would it be any different from any other organization? Whether, you could collaborate, whether two nonprofits can collaborate together, two for-profit organizations can form partnerships or alliances. And it would be the same thing for social enterprises, right? We could work with nonprofits, we can work with social enterprises, we can work with for-profit organizations.
Okay, and Rose is actually almost thinking more about your last question. So she's asking, isn't Tesla a corporation with a social responsibility arm?
So that's, again, like, it depends, because if you look at Tesla and you look at what Elon Musk is doing, he's actually changing the whole value chain, right? So he's not just building cars, he's actually looking at the batteries and he's looking at the infrastructure to then support the electric vehicles, right? So, I mean, I think we could go on and debate the whole thing probably for more than 2 hours. But the point I put that out there is that to essentially say that there is no one specific definition of what a social enterprise is.
Yeah, I think that was sort of almost the main message here, that it's very ambiguous in terms of the definition. I don't see any more questions in the chat, but Lucretia, I really want to thank you. Oh, before I do that, I see Alina just raised her hand. So Alina, I will let you ask your question. And then if anyone else has questions, you can raise your hand as well.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. So I really appreciated the presentation. Thank you. It's amazing to see a social enterprise tackling such an issue. I could really kind of relate to what you were saying regarding having an idea and not knowing if your credentials kind of match up. So I guess my question really is, in the early days, when you kind of first had that moment where you were angry or, infuriated, I've had moments like that as well. I'm also very passionate about, tackling issues such as violence against women and anti-human trafficking. And these seem like such big issues that, we can't really solve unless you're, within that field. And I guess, how did you translate that frustration and anger? And how long did it take you in terms of the timeline? So that moment of frustration, and how did that kind of translate in terms of actually taking action and kind of building a team and how you went about making it a reality? Because I've had moments like that and sort of attempts, but it's not been anything sustaining, if you know what I mean. So I'm just curious if you could speak to that, please.
Absolutely. So the moment of, the funny thing is, the moment of anger, if you will, there was almost one particular spark that I can remember. it so happened that because I was looking to understand how could I affect change, I signed up for so many newsletters. And I had all these newsletters from different organizations. And what happened, one of them was telling me that, just like we mentioned, there was an incubator that was opening up, and there was a program that was talking about how to harness ideas. It wasn't about social entrepreneurship at all. And I will tell you, it had nothing to do with it, but it was just about, it was a program for people that had an idea, but didn't know if they had a business. And so it was an ideation type of program. And what happened is that it just so happened in one of those moments of frustration, one of those newsletters popped up into my inbox, and I just applied. And honestly was a run-on sentence. I applied with something that said, we use existing technologies to address and eliminate rape culture. And probably a bit longer sentence. It was pretty much a run-on sentence because I didn't know what I was saying at that time, but they accepted me into the program. And that started on a journey where I started looking at going through a process, so an ideation process, if you will. And there are organizations that help you go through ideation. And what that does is that it helps you start to think about your idea and to see how would you then start tackling that idea, so that then you understand if the idea has legs, if you will. And I knew I had an idea, but I didn't know if I had a business. And so that's why it took me through those steps. And it was important because even though I came from a business background, I was really struggling. I'll be honest, Alina, I was really struggling to apply all the business practices that I knew and learned and actually had been managing people to do and to follow, to apply them in a social context. I really struggled. And so having that rigor where I had a third person saying, okay, well, how would you think about that? How would you think about that? And just kind of push my assumptions and test my assumptions and continually do that was incredibly helpful. So that moment went from, I started then a program probably a couple of weeks later. And then about, just to give you a little bit of a timeline, then probably I think that program ended. And I think that summer, it was like between spring and summer, then I got accepted into another program. And that's where I started actually building a team and having individuals join the team. But
it's interesting that you mentioned that you've been on more than one program, because I was in one program and that came to an end. And I kind of maybe felt like a bit of a failure because I hadn't kind of contained and sustained that momentum. But going back to your point now, I guess it's okay to go to another program or to kind of, build on your kind of community and kind of, continue the momentum, I guess. So yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think, David, I just saw you put in the chat bot, is that one way is discovery driven, is that different programs will have different approaches. Mm-hmm. And some might resonate with you more than others. So I wouldn't say that you've tried one approach, it didn't work, so you can try another. It's also, again, think about the timing of it. The timing isn't just what's happening out external and the social factors, it's also internal, right? Yeah. And it could also be in taking you through all these different kind of discovery tools or ideation tools will help you see, are you on which path should you take? And that sometimes the path you're on might not be the right one. There might be a different way to address it. The same problem, but address it from a different perspective or angle.
Thank you. Just lastly, was this the one thing that infuriated you the most, or did you have any other kind of ideas that you were very passionate about as well?
It was the one that stuck with me the most. The one that no matter what else I looked at, no what else I was interested in, this one just stayed in the back of my mind. And I couldn't seem to let it go.
Thank you. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for that. I don't see any more questions in the chat, but Lucretia, I really do want to thank you again for taking the time to present this for us and share all of your insights and help us learn more about really how to build that social enterprise and even what is a social enterprise and clarifying that. So I see so many comments in the chat just thanking you for that. So I really want to echo those thanks. And I do want to thank everyone here for attending the session of Founder Fundamentals. And I always see familiar faces and names, so thank you guys for joining us each and every week. I do want to remind you that we do have a link for the survey, so just let us know how we did today, and if you have any suggestions on how we can improve. Always wanting to learn from that. I know that Julia just put the link again in the chat for those of you who haven't completed yet. It really takes about a minute to complete, so I really do encourage you to do that. I do want to also mention to you, or actually remind you, that we do have our Tech Accelerator applications that are open right now, and they close on February 21st. It's a really, really great program if you already have an existing startup and you're really looking to scale that startup and sort of launch it. So that is, the applications for that program closes on February 21st, and you can find the link below for that as well. Applications will close tomorrow night for Venture Catalyst. This is for earlier stage entrepreneurs really looking for concept validation, and it's a 6-week program, and applications do close tomorrow night for that one as well. Also do want to remind you that this is the 4th session. So the next session we have is a really important one, and it's all about mental health for founders. So I do encourage you all to attend that session. It's happening next Thursday from 6 to 8 p.m. Also want to remind everyone to complete that survey. The link is in the chat as well. And I will be sending out the link for the slides that were shared during the session today. I do want to thank everyone again for attending, and hopefully we'll see you all again next week. Take care, everyone. Bye.